Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I am here today to give you another exciting look at a brand new, just being announced lens, and this is from Sigma. And I'm particularly excited about this lens because I have been fairly critical of the size of a lot of Sigma's recent prime lenses, and very critical since its release of the size of the ART 85mm F1.4. I'm delighted to say that Sigma has a brand new design of the 85mm F1.4 ART lens for DN, and specifically here I'm reviewing on Sony FE full frame mirrorless. This is a lens that is designed from the ground up for mirrorless, and I think it is going to be a great addition to the Sony platform and a great reasonably priced alternative to the 85mm F1.4 GM. Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist, modern wallet that makes it easy to access your cards and money when you need them using their unique fanning mechanism. Visit phantomwallet.com to check out their various sizes, styles, and finishes, and use coupon code DUSTIN15 to get 15% off when you're ready to check out. Now today I'm going to be filming on the new 85mm f1.4 on a Sony A9, and so as you watch this you can get a sense of the video performance. Now today we're going to be giving you the definitive review of the lens, and so I am going to be going in some detail, doing some detailed comparisons to the GM lens, to the existing FE version of the 85mm f1.4 ART, and to a lesser degree to the Samyang AF 85mm f1.4. These representing the now 4 options available that are f1.4 and at the 85mm focal length on the Sony FE platform. And so if you want a quicker, less detailed review, take a look at the standard review, which you can link to here. It will give you my findings and an overview, show you some photos, but without going into all of the detail that is a part of this process. But if you want the absolute best and most information for making a buying decision, you're in the right spot. So we're going to jump in first by taking a look at the overall build and handling and some physical comparisons to these other lenses that I've mentioned. Let's take a look. First of all, I do want to point out that I really like what Sigma's done here. I mean, the most obvious thing obviously is with the size itself, which we'll take a closer look at it in a moment. But also as a part of this, what we are getting is a thoroughly modern Sony E-mount design. I mean, from the ground up designed for E-mount. And so what that means is that not just the focus motor, I mean, you can see here that this is a lens to where, you know, they have just basically added in the adapter as a part of that to make it work on Sony. In this case, we're designed from the ground up. And so you get a lot of additional features that are kind of mirrorless specific. And so let's first of all take a moment and highlight those. First of all, you've got an aperture ring here, and so that allows it to compete with the G Master in terms of the feature set, in that you've got the ability to rack through the aperture at 1/3 stop detents, which I love. You also have the option to declick the aperture down here, and so then you can just, you know, smoothly glide through the aperture. So as you see with the lens not mounted on the camera, nothing happens when I click that aperture ring. And so it does require everything to be routed through the, you know, the aperture iris control. So you have the option of going through this aperture either with clicks or without clicks. Now, something interesting that they also have is that I've never seen before is the aperture lock. So what you'll see right now is that we are locked into the manual aperture control, and the automatic is not available to me. So what I can do is I can declick that lock, and then I can move into that range. I could, you know, just leave it like that. The other option here is that if you don't want to use the aperture ring and you're afraid it's going to mess up your shots, you can actually lock it here in automatic mode and just control it from within the camera. And so basically you're disabling the whole manual aperture ring. Interesting approach for sure, and you know, a cool option for those who, you know, either those that want to use a manual aperture like myself, or those of you just want to go automatic. So also here you've got an AF/MF switch, which as you know I love to have, and you've got the focus hold button, and so you've got the ability to, you know, program that to a variety of functions. And so basically what you have got is every one of the features that the GM lens has, the ability to click or declick the aperture ring here, and then a focus hold button and an AF/MF switch. So that allows it really to compete head to head with the GM lens, while of course offering up a much smaller footprint. So let's give you an idea of how some of these lenses weigh out, because particularly when it comes to the FE version of the original Art Series lens, it's hard to sometimes get the real numbers on that. And so let's take a look at real numbers here. Put that guy on the scale. 1,213 grams is what it weighs in at. And so that is a serious chunk of lens, not far off of the weight of what a typical 70 to 200 millimeter f2.8 weighs. And this also, by the way, weighs in at around 300 grams more, almost 350 grams more than what the new Tamron 70 to 180 millimeter zoom does. So comparing it to the new lens, which weighs in at 626 grams. We are talking half the weight for this new lens. And then when compared to the GM lens, we are looking at 821 grams. And so we've got a couple hundred grams basically of weight savings compared to the GM lens. And so the only lens lighter that you're going to get on Sony that is a, full frame 85mm f1.4 is the Samyang. And so it weighs in at 568 grams. And so it's only about 60 grams lighter than what this new Sigma is, even though the Sigma has, I would say the superior build quality. Definitely feels like more dense materials. Not that I have any problem with the Samyang in terms of its build. I think it's a nice lens. And so certainly there's an asset there. And what's also pretty clear is that if you put them side by side, I mean, you are not even talking the same class of lens here in terms of size. I mean, it's just ludicrously different, the size between the two. So you've got a smaller front filter, 77 millimeters versus an 86 millimeter front filter thread, obviously about half the weight. And in terms of our overall length, about 102 millimeters in length compared to somewhere about 164 millimeters in length for the original Art Series lens. And so it's not quite, it's more than half the overall, but it's certainly a good 50% smaller. So we've got more like 115 millimeters in length. And so overall, you're saving roughly 10 millimeters in length between those two lenses. So it's very unique, of course, for Sigma to be producing compact lenses, but kudos to them for doing that. Really, really awesome here. Now, in terms of any other features that we've got here, we've got a higher aperture blade count, 11 aperture blades, which again allows it to compete more with the GM in terms of specification, 9 aperture blades on that, and then also on the Samyang. Also worth noting here is that we've got a really nice lens hood, which has a rubberized transition area. It's got, a gripped portion, and it also has a locking mechanism on it. So once again, it makes it more like the GM lens hood. It's actually a little bit of a deeper lens hood than what comes with the GM, and so that helps with shielding that front element. Now, while this lens can focus down to 85 centimeters, which is the same as the previous Art Series lens, it actually has a higher magnification figure because although physically it looks a lot shorter, it actually is a slightly longer focal length than what the original is, which is a little bit shy, somewhere around 83, 84 millimeters. This is a full 85 millimeters in focal length. So as a result, it gives us a little bit higher magnification figure, which is always useful. Now, optically, this lens is pretty complex for an 85 millimeter lens. It is 15 elements in 11 groups. And so, for example, the GM lens is 11 elements in 8 groups. And so, much less complex than what this lens is. We'll examine how that image quality breaks down as a result of that. So as you can see, Sigma has gone essentially from one extreme to the other. They have gone from having the by far largest option available. And when I did my 6-way 85mm shootout a year and a half ago, the Sigma was the aberration of the group. It just towered over the rest of the lenses. And I always felt personally that while the optical performance from that lens is spectacular, it's a very good lens optically, but I always found that it wasn't it wasn't equivalent in advantage in optical performance to the pure size of the lens. You know, for having a lens that's that much bigger, I wanted it to just blow the competition away, and it really didn't. And so, of course, to be able to reduce that down to essentially, you know, half the size and definitely half the weight is a great achievement for Sigma. Now we'll see if they manage to uphold that good optical performance in just a moment. First of all, however, let's talk a bit about autofocus, because obviously that is a key aspect here as well. Now, in this case, Sigma is continuing to use STM type, stepping motors as a part of this. So far, however, I've been quite pleased with the lenses that they have actually purposely designed for mirrorless. I've been pretty pleased with all of them in terms of their autofocus performance, and that is true here. Now, understand, I have been working with a lens that is, not the final firmware of release, and so I've been assured that some of the little glitches that I've seen have been resolved as a part of that, what's shipping to consumers, what you would actually purchase. And so as a part of that, what I've noticed as far as, let me just quickly get any negatives out of the way. I have noticed a few occasions where I would get stuck and be unable to focus on a foreground object. That's not an unusual thing for me to encounter on lots of lenses on lots of different camera platforms. However, I do think it's something that can be improved somewhat via firmware. Another thing that I have noticed is that when it comes to, I've actually filmed a few of my segments with the lens, testing it for that, and then also some devotion episodes that I do for the church that I pastor. And so as a part of that, I have noticed that there is a little bit of occasional hunting that is a part of just, a standard kind of stable shot like this. And so that's another thing I think that might be resolved when it comes to the autofocus performance, just minor things that I think firmware will upgrade. So the pluses here is that, this is purposely designed for mirrorless. And so first of all, what we're getting is very fast, very quiet. Definitely faster and smoother than what we see on the 85mm G Master lens, which has a little bit of a rough kind of grating sound periodically for autofocus, though fortunately that doesn't show up much for video. It does a better job there, but it's just in more general purpose use all the time. The Sigma seems smoother in operation than what the GM does. It's also more consistent than what I found with the FE version of the older Art Series lens. That older lens, of course, had to, basically the FE version is an adapted version, but with a built-in adapter as opposed to having to use something externally. And so as a byproduct of that, while it did a very good job, I did notice some glitches, and you'll see that in just a moment when we do the focus pull test. And I just found it was less consistent in my test than what the opposing lenses were. So that obviously is improved with a purpose-designed DN version of the lens. You're just getting very, very fast autofocus. The fastest, I would say, of any of the 85mm F1.4 options that I've used. And I would say the focus speed is now very much on par with the Sony FE 85mm F1.8, which is kind of the best focusing lens of the 85mm options that I've used on Sony. So I would say we're very close to that performance. Maybe not as consistent yet, all the time, but I think that with firmware that will be the case. I also found that IAF results were really excellent. No problem with that. Locked on, gave me consistently focused results, as you can see with some of these shots here. So we'll pause right here and we'll quickly give you a look at all four lenses doing video focus pulls, and so that you can, make some judgment calls on that. So of those 4 lenses, I give the top marks to the GM at the moment. I think that it and the Sigma DN lens were very, very similar, but I think just an edge right now to the GM lens for that. You can definitely see a lot more stepping taking place with the older art lens, and obviously it's not really designed for this application, and it kind of shows there. And the Samyang has a little bit more pulsing and is less smooth in its operation. And so I think that the Sigma DN is competing quite well with the GM lens, and it's right up there at the top for that performance. So overall, autofocus here is going to be a strength and not a weakness for sure. It's going to be something that is going to give you really, really good results, and I think it vaults right up there towards the front of the pack with the native Sony options. So let's break down the image quality performance here and see if Sigma has managed to uphold the high bar that it has established while vastly reducing the size of the lens. So we'll start by looking at where basically all the weaknesses stand on this lens, and that is that obviously the compromise that had to be made by Sigma to get this as compact but as high performing as what it is that when it comes to distortion and vignette, that's what had to give. So here is worst case scenario. If you disable all of the corrections, this is what you're going to get. So a pretty strong amount of pincushion distortion, no doubt about it, enough so that you see a little bit of stretching in the corners, fairly heavy vignette. Now at the moment there is no standard profile in Lightroom as the time of this review, since the lens is not yet released. So this is what I get if I have the corrections enabled. There is, obviously you can see a little bit of the correction of the vignette that comes in the embedded RAW, but the distortion is not really fully corrected. So here's a look at what I was able to produce after manually correcting it myself. Good news is that this is pretty linear. As you can see, there's no major issue. There's nothing really that remains after correction. Now here's the other bit of good news. If I disable in JPEGs, I disable those corrections, here's what you get. So you can see all the, the flaws, warts and all here. But if the standard corrections are on, which they're probably going to be for all of you all of the time, this is what you actually get in a JPEG. And so obviously a major difference in terms of the end result. Here's another real-world example here. This was an image that I shot at a wedding, and so you can see on the left side the DNG or the RAW file not corrected. So you can see some of that bulge as part of that pincushion distortion. On the right side, you can see that while I haven't straightened the horizon on the image, you can see that everything is straight, and the image just looks a little bit brighter in JPEG form on the right. Now here, this again is a DNG image. As far as it affecting it, because the horizon is closer to center, if I didn't tell you it was there, you probably wouldn't pick up on it. There is the slightest bit of curvature there, but not really significant in this kind of setting. Now these are really the only areas where I'm going to give any advantage to the original art 85mm. Here you can see it tested. Distortion is very low, and on the right side we've got the G Master. It has a little bit more pincushion distortion and maybe a tiny bit more vignette, but as you can see, those are the strengths for these lenses. So for the series of comparisons of resolution, we're going to have the main lens being tested here, the new art DN lens on the left side. So I'm going to start off by comparing it to the original massive art lens here. So taking a look at the center of the frame, we can see that in the center of the frame, I'm going to give a very, very mild edge to the original art lens. It is, as you can see, extremely, extremely close. And there's areas here, I think the contrast is a little bit better on the new lens. If we look at this zone mid-frame, a very, very similar result. I slightly favor the DN result. And if we look down into the corner here, I slightly favor the original art series lens. As you can see, the performance though is, there's some give and take, pretty similar across the frame. So if I can compare that to the G Master lens, we can see that they look more similar than different in the center of the frame, highly similar result even at a 2:1 pixel level. Here at mid-frame, I actually like the art lens, obviously clearly better than the GM. There's some kind of weird results there because there's other places where the GM looks more consistent. And so it just kind of depends on where you look at in the frame. Here I definitely favor the GM. Down here in the corner, however, I actually think the art looks a little bit better. So it's kind of weird. In the corner, art looks better. If I move over to mid-frame at the bottom, the GM looks better. So, you know, again, it's give and take. Now, if I compare it to the Samyang AF 85mm F1.4, I will give a caveat that I have tested this Samyang multiple times, and I've actually gotten sharper results in the past. I don't know if a bump has slightly decentered it, but it's not showing as sharp as some of my previous tests. And so anyway, that caveat aside, there's no question that the Sigma looks sharper in the center, and if we look here mid-frame, it definitely looks sharper as well. Down here on the bottom, where, you know, the Sigma looked a little bit softer, it still looks better than what the Samyang does. So backing off to a pixel level here, but here we have a landscape image at f1.4. This is a raw file. And so first of all, I mean, obviously in the center of the frame, that's really, really impressive resolution. This is on an A7R Mark III, as all these tests are, so 42 megapixels. But we can see across the frame, we have really, really quite amazing results for f1.4 and a landscape distance. So this is an extremely sharp lens. If we go a little bit more intimate here, we can see that if we go in and look at a pixel level, very nice contrast, nice sharp delineation along the edges, chromatic aberrations very well controlled. Likewise, this image of my dog, just a casual image, but f1.4 wide open. Look at the detail on the nose and the, you know, the precise focus on the eye, even though, you know, not great lighting conditions on the eye. Just for the fun of it, here's one more, and you can see if we zoom in here, we have really beautiful focus on the eye, and you can see no chromatic aberrations in these high contrast areas. Again, it's a great, great result. So if we stop on down to f2, we can see that a good result gets better still. Contrast bumps way up. You can see it looks really fantastic. Our center of the frame, just a little bit better contrast. You can see it a little bit in the building. Not a huge difference there. Looking down into the corner, better contrast, better detail there. So a superior result, and we definitely see the biggest jump in the center of the frame. So here is just an available light shot from a wedding that I was a part of. And so you can see this is at f2, which we're examining. Look at how great the detail is on all of the faces. Skin tones look great. And so, you know, bokeh looks nice, which we'll examine a bit more. This is a really, really nice lens optically. So if we stop down to f2.8 and we compare it to the big art, we can see in the center of the frame that they're both really, really fantastic. I mean, I don't know that one is giving up anything to the other. At our mid-frame result, I do think that the original art is just ever so slightly sharper there, but a little bit more contrast. Down in the corner, again, I think a little bit more contrast, but like in this zone, I actually favor the new lens. So I mean, a very similar type result really across the frame. If we can compare it to the GM lens, again, both of them are sharp. I actually think the Sigma looks a little bit sharper. One other thing that I will point out is that the GM lens, the light transmission is maybe not top tier. And so you can see that we're actually getting a little bit brighter an image off of the Sigma. Looking here at mid-frame, I do think the GM has a bit of an advantage there. You can see in the text, it looks sharper. And down here in the corner, both of them are really, really sharp. More similar than different. And back in the zone where the GM had the advantage, I would say that they're more similar now. Again, if we go back to the Samyang, again, I don't think that the Samyang is performing up to full spec. It doesn't look bad here, but the Sigma definitely looks better. Mid-frame, the same is true. Again, not a bad result on the Samyang. It looks quite good, but not as good as what the Sigma does. And down on the corner, however, I was getting really sharp corners before, and so I'm not any longer, so, you know. But this is really more about the Sigma, and it looks fantastic. Here's a shot of my family, just taken by a nephew here at this wedding. This is f3.2. He's not a photographer, and so you can see, however, IAF has done the trick. Everybody's eyes are really nicely in focus. And you can see as I just kind of pan across the frame how nice the detail is. And I would say if I was to venture a guess, it is my wife whose eyes were caught. Hers look the sharpest here. But anyway, you can see a really beautiful result from them. So one final quick peek at f5.6, you can see resolution is just fantastic. We're starting to see lots of moire there because it is so incredibly sharp. f16 being the limit of the aperture range, minimum aperture, you can see it is softer due to diffraction. Looking here at mid-frame, I mean, the Sigma looks fantastically sharp at f5.6, and down in the corner, again, radically sharp. This is a great for landscapes. And speaking of landscapes, here's one at f5.6, and so you can see beautiful color, and across the frame, really great detail and contrast. Nice drawing distance. Detail is holding up, good acuity even out towards the distance. Here is another that, again, colors look really great here. Contrast and detail look fantastic. I mean, this lens, again, outside of that distortion, essentially, this is a fantastic lens. Now, one other advantage over the original Art Series lens is this frames tighter to begin with. The original Art always framed loose. I don't think it's quite 85 millimeters. The other thing is that you can see we have a slightly better magnification level here. You can see that it's just on the left side, we're framing in tighter with the new lens. You can see that here, that there's a little bit more magnification with this lens. You can also see that at minimum focus, minimum focus distance, it's actually the superior lens. And so it also has an advantage when it comes to that. Now, another real area of strength for the new DN Art lens is that it really controls chromatic aberrations quite well. And so you can see here on this card, on these numbers, really crisply defined. What you're going to see on the Samyang, for example, is you can see some purple fringing there. If I switch to the GM lens, we actually see some surprisingly strong green fringing here. And looking at the original Art lens, we also see some green fringing. And I found that it actually had more field aberrations than what it would test. And so I do think that the new lens is superior in this regard. We can also see when stopping down that, first of all, you can see that in the corner, we're getting a little bit of cat eye effect, not too bad. Stop down, you can see the fairly high blade count, looks like around 11 aperture blades. But it's still nice and circular. The only negative is you get a little bit of stretching due to that distortion. And so that's the only thing negative I can really say about the Bokeh. Here's another something interesting. If we look at this type shot where we've got these the high contrast in Bokeh. First of all, Bokeh circles are definitely more pleasing looking on the new Art lens. But what I really want to point out to you is look at how much less chromatic aberration there is compared to the original Art lens. Lots of fringing here in this high contrast situation, and you can see how much more neutral the new lens is. And so that's definitely a superior performance. What this equals out to is really incredible real-world sharpness and results. You can see even at f1.4, we've got tons of detail here in this object, and in these handles, lots of potential for chromatic aberrations here, nice and shiny, but yet what we see is amazing contrast and detail along with beautiful bokeh. So I also like to run this test when I can to test the bokeh, both the foreground bokeh and the background bokeh. So in this first one, we're looking at the background blur, which obviously is incredibly soft and smooth. I really like the bokeh from this particular lens. And then here where we've got the foreground out of focus, I actually think the foreground bokeh is nice and smooth as well. It's never quite as smooth or creamy as the background, but I do think this is a good result. So just out of some interest here, let's compare the bokeh from the new DN lens compared to the original Art. And so you can see here that, first of all, due to higher magnification and the shorter focal length, when you put these at the same distance, obviously the new lens frames tighter, and thus it produces bigger and softer bokeh circles. And so if we take a look at those, we can also see that there's a little less activity. You can see just the tiniest bit of concentric rings. Not bad. I'm not criticizing the original lens. I just think that this newer one is a little bit smoother when it comes to that. Now, if we compare to the GM lens, the GM does have very nice bokeh. You can see even here that I think you're getting a little bit larger maximum aperture than what you do with the GM. That shows up in both the exposure here and also the fact that the bokeh circle is larger. And in this case, it's not a huge difference in the framing. It is a little bit tighter, but it's not as significant. And other thing I do want to point out here is that you see how neutral the new Art lens is, and you can see some of that green fringing here on the GM lens. You can also see a little bit of green outlining on the bokeh circle, whereas on the new Art lens it is neutral. So let's just look at a few more images here since this is a brand new lens that I want you all to have a chance to be familiar with. In this kind of setting, I think that it's handled these kind of bright prismatic circles really, really nicely. To me, that's really a lovely end result. And then a lot of cream there in the background. Very nice bokeh. Here at a more medium distance, it's handled this scene just fine, very artful, I think, and very high contrast white blossoms, and you can see that they are handled really well, really beautiful detail on them, no chromatic aberrations, a strong result. Here's another similar kind of shot at a little bit further out distance. So once again, chromatic aberrations, well controlled. Bokeh looks great here. Here is an F1.4 portrait shot, and so you can see this is just available light. You can see great detail, and then of course a really soft scene all around, consistent IAF even with sunglasses on. This was at a wedding that I was a part of, and so shooting from quite a distance, but you can see as I zoom in here, just this is probably from about 60 feet away, and yet you can see how very nice the detail is here. This is at f2, and so a great end result. So, as we saw, the issues are there at the beginning. It definitely has the largest amount of pincushion distortion that I have seen in an 85mm lens. And I think that obviously was the optical compromise that Sigma made to give us this small size. That being said, once the standard profile is there for RAWs as well as it is for JPEGs, it's not going to be really a major issue. And, fortunately, for the most part, pincushion distortion is less destructive than what barrel distortion is, in my opinion. It's definitely the more flattering for portrait type work, to be sure. And so I didn't actually notice the distortion for a lot of shots unless there really was straight lines in the shot. That's the only time that I noticed it. So I don't think it's going to be a major issue. And while the vignette is on the heavier side, there's a lot of 85mm lenses that have similarly heavy levels of vignette. And again, that corrects quite well, and most of the Sony bodies are so good with shadow recovery that it becomes less of an issue here. So I think that those two weaknesses, not necessarily a huge deal. And what we found is that the sharpness actually compares very favorably to both the GM and the original Art Series lens. Now, that's true when we're doing the chart test. Out in the real world, however, I would say, at least compared to the older Art Series lens, I actually favor the image quality from the new DN lens. That better control of chromatic aberrations. I always found that the Art Series lens, the older lens, had more real-world aberrations than what showed up when you chart tested it. And that's why I think that a lot of the early reviews missed out on that. But I have found that in real-world use, there are a lot of situations where I lose some sharpness and contrast due to aberrations and then trying to correct those. The new DN lens does a better job with all of that. I also think that the bokeh is nicer, and just the overall character of the lens, I actually favor the look from. I think the bokeh is really nice, and so at the end of the day, I think that that Sigma's done a great job with this, and there are a couple of optical flaws. There is a lot of optical strengths here as well, however, and so, at the end of the day, I think that they've done a fantastic job of condensing down the size, giving us improved autofocus performance with more autofocus consistency, and also giving us a beautiful optical performance. So how about the price? The US price for this lens is right at $1,100 US, and so it's priced at the same point as the earlier Art Series lens. And I think that provides an excellent value when you're comparing it to the G Master lens, for example, and so I think that it will sell quite well for Sigma at that price point. I think that this is going to be a very strong alternative to the G Master lens, giving you essentially all of the performance of the GM at a much lower price. It even has all the features that the GM has as well. And so great job, Sigma, for giving us a great lens here, and I'm really excited about it. Once again, we want to thank Phantom Wallets for sponsoring today's episode. The Phantom is available in both the S and the R models. There's a variety of finishes that you can get them in, everything from wood to carbon fiber to titanium and various other materials along the way. So a lot of finish options, and of course that ability to quickly fan out your cards in that moment when you're looking for the right card. And to quickly find that and extract it is to me the biggest advantage. When I have been kind of demoing it for my friends, it's that thing that you know, I see their eyes light up and say, cool, I'd like to have one of those. If you also would like to have one of those, please check out Phantom Wallets at this web address, and if you'll use the code Dustin15, that's D-U-S-T-I-N and the numbers 15, you will get 15% off your order there. So go check them out. If you'd like to see my text review, if you'll look in the description down below, I do have linkage to that there. There's also linkage there to an image gallery. You can check out some beautiful photos from the lens. Beyond that, of course, there's buying links, but just remember with something brand new like this, if you're watching it at the beginning, it may take a few weeks for some of those links to populate as retailers are just starting to add up their own landing page for this particular lens. There's also linkage there to follow me on social media, to become a patron, or to sign up for my newsletter. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.